This video is about String Quartet No. 8, a piece of music for string quartet composed in 1960. The composer who wrote it was called Dmitri Shostakovich. In fact, he wrote it in a few days while visiting a city in East Germany called Dresden. The centre of that beautiful city had been destroyed in 1945, towards the end of the Second World War. And Shostakovich dedicated this piece to the victims of fascism and war. Your piece could be inspired by Shostakovich's String Quartet No. 8 in many ways. For example, you might be inspired by what the piece was about. Or you might be inspired by how Shostakovich incorporated musical ideas from other cultures in this piece. Or you might be inspired by some of the methods Shostakovich used to compose the piece, and see if you can do the same. Shostakovich's String Quartet No. 8 is split into 5 smaller pieces called movements. Let's have a listen to an extract from the second movement. How does this music make you feel? It's really fast and loud and quite harsh sounding, and this is called dissonant music, and I'll talk more about that later on. As I said, Shostakovich wrote this piece while in Dresden, a city in Germany that had been bombarded during World War II. Some musicologists believe this is represented in the music and perhaps explains some of that dissonant sound. Maybe your piece could be inspired by the sounds of war and conflict. For example, how could you represent the idea of soldiers marching, or gunshots, or fighter planes zooming past using a string quartet? Now, let's have a look at some of the composition techniques Shostakovich used in this piece. Throughout the piece, Shostakovich uses a short motif made up of just 4 notes. But what's particularly interesting about these 4 notes is that using German names for notes, they spell out the first initial and 3 letters of his surname, D-S-C-H, which sounds like this. You hear this motif pop up every now and again, and sometimes being passed around all the different instruments in the quartet. This passing around of the motif between the different instruments is called imitation. Have a look at this passage of music from the second movement. Now let's hear the quartet play this very slowly at first so we can identify the motif being passed around the different instruments. Can you hear? It starts in the cello, then passed to the viola, then second violin, then first violin, and so on. Let's hear it now at its correct tempo. See if you can create a musical motif by using your name or initials. If so, see if you can use this as a starting point for your composition. Another interesting moment in this second movement is a little later on, when Shostakovich takes a melody from another one of his pieces. This little tune was inspired by traditional Jewish dance music. Perhaps your piece could use musical ideas from other cultures or styles of music that you like. For example, you could compose melodies using notes from Indian ragas, or you might use rhythmic ideas from trap or grime music. I mentioned before about the use of dissonance in this piece. Dissonance can be created in a few different ways. For example, in a melody, the distance between one note and the next can sound dissonant. Chords can also sound dissonant when two or more notes played at the same time create a harsh, clashing sound. One way of creating dissonance is to use notes that are directly next to each other. For example, F sharp to G or B to C. Here's an example in the second violin part. When these notes are played together as a chord, it's called a minor second. You can really hear that clashing dissonant sound. Another way of creating dissonance is by using notes that are 6 semitones apart, and this is called a tritone. For example, C to F sharp or G to C sharp. Here's an example of a tritone taken from Shostakovich's quartet. So let's have a listen to the notes on their own. And together as chords. The use of dissonance can really help to build tension in your music, particularly when you play with the use of different dynamics too. So, to recap, you could use references to war and conflict as inspiration for your piece, or the composition technique of creating a motif using letters from your name, or you may be inspired by the use of dissonance. We're really looking forward to seeing what you compose.